Where did the magazine reload flip come from?
That funny thing, that I'm going to give total cred to Keanu.
Wow.
100%. He started doing that in the second one. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? He's like, check it out. Fuck. He started doing it. I was like, that's awesome.
It is awesome. People do that now.
Check. Yeah, it's a legit thing. They're doing a competition.
You know how crazy that is? That an actor for a film decides to come up with a thing, and it's actually a quicker way to eject a magazine.
At 60 years old, Keanu Reeves stands as one of the most admired figures in Hollywood. To fans, he's the soft-spoken superstar with a gentle smile, the man who turned blockbuster roles into legends and kindness into a personal brand. But behind the internet's favorite wholesome celebrity lies a story that is almost unbearably tragic. Abandonment, grief, and heartbreak have shadowed him at every stage of life. Yet through it all, Keanu never surrendered to bitterness. Instead, he became a symbol of resilience. This is the untold story of a man shaped by pain and defined by grace. Keanu Reeves never had the kind of childhood that builds a sense of safety. From the very beginning, life was unstable. He was born in Beirut in 1964, to a British mother and an American father. But when Keanu was only 3 years old, his father walked out of his life. No slow fading away, no heartfelt goodbye, just gone. That absence left a silence that never really healed. His mother did her best to hold the family together. She worked as a showgirl and later as a costume designer, moving wherever opportunities appeared. That meant Keanu's early years were marked by constant uprooting. The family bounced from Lebanon to Australia, then to New York, and eventually settled in Toronto. Every time Keanu began to adjust, it was time to move again. He became the perpetual outsider, the new kid who never stayed long enough to belong. School brought little relief. Dyslexia made reading a daily struggle, and teachers often mistook his quiet nature for lack of effort. By the time he reached his teens, he had attended 4 different high schools in just 5 years. The instability made friendships fleeting, and his grades never matched his potential. Still, one thing about Keanu stood out even then: his determination to remain true to himself. When casting agents later pressured him to change his strange name to something more marketable, he refused. Keanu, meaning cool breeze over the mountains in Hawaiian, wasn't just a name, it was an identity he would not abandon. At home, things weren't easier. His father, struggling with addiction, reappeared only briefly before disappearing again for good. His mother remarried several times, leaving Keanu without a stable father figure. It was a lonely existence, but in that loneliness, he learned self-reliance. His childhood carved into him a kind of resilience that would define how he faced everything to come. For Keanu, those early years weren't a rise toward fame, they were survival. And though he could not have known it, the instability, the rejection, and the absence of family were shaping him into the kind of man who could endure tragedy far greater than most people could imagine. But before the heartbreak, there was discovery. The moment he stumbled onto the one thing that would give his life focus. Intrigued by the story so far? There's more to uncover, so give this video a like and subscribe to keep the past alive. By the time Keanu reached his teenage years, he was already used to instability. But somewhere in the chaos, he discovered a passion that gave him purpose: acting. It started small: school plays, local theater groups, anything that allowed him to step into another world. For a boy who often felt out of place, the stage became a refuge. There, dyslexia didn't matter. Moving from school to school didn't matter. He could become someone else, if only for a few hours, and in that transformation he found freedom. At first, his dream wasn't acting. Like many Canadian boys, Keanu was obsessed with hockey. He played as a goalie, and was good enough that teammates believed he could have gone pro. They even gave him a nickname, The Wall, because he seemed impossible to score against. But fate had other plans. A serious injury ended his hockey ambitions before they could fully take off. And just like that, his dream of the NHL was gone. Acting filled that void. By 15, Keanu was already drawn to films, sneaking into theaters whenever he could. He didn't have a roadmap, but he had an obsession, and sometimes that's enough. At 17, he dropped out of high school for good. He knew the classroom wasn't his place, but he also knew he had to try to make something of himself. Those early years weren't glamorous. He worked odd jobs, from sharpening skates at an ice rink to stacking shelves, all while chasing auditions. He managed to land small parts in commercials, and even hosted a Canadian kids show for a brief period. Each step was modest, but to Keanu, it was progress. What kept him going wasn't fame or fortune. It was the sense that he had finally found something that mattered, something that gave him direction. For the first time, he wasn't just drifting through life, he was building one. And then, one chance decision would change everything. Keanu packed his belongings, left Canada behind, and headed to Hollywood. What waited for him there was more than opportunity. It was the beginning of a career that would define him. When Keanu arrived in Hollywood, he had little more than determination and a few small credits behind him. He wasn't the typical leading man. He was quiet, reserved, almost shy, but casting directors noticed something unique in him, a mix of vulnerability and intensity that couldn't be faked. His first real splash came with River's Edge in 1986. The film was dark, gritty, and unsettling, but Keanu stood out. Critics praised his authenticity, and suddenly, this young Canadian newcomer wasn't just another face in the crowd. People in Hollywood began to whisper his name. Then came the movie that made him a household figure, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure in 1989. The goofy, time-traveling comedy could have been forgettable, but Keanu's portrayal of Ted, the lovable slacker with boundless enthusiasm, struck a chord with audiences. It wasn't just a role, it was a cultural moment. Keanu became a star almost overnight, and the catchphrases from the film followed him everywhere. But while Hollywood tried to box him in as the quirky comedy guy, Keanu had other plans. He jumped into Point Break in 1991, playing an undercover FBI agent alongside Patrick Swayze. The film not only cemented him as an action star, but also revealed the range he had been waiting to show. Audiences saw a new side of Keanu, intense, daring, and unforgettable. By 1994, he was headlining Speed, one of the biggest action hits of the decade. Riding a bus rigged with explosives might have been pure Hollywood spectacle, but Keanu's performance turned the film into a phenomenon. He wasn't just surviving in Hollywood anymore, he was dominating it. And yet, for all the fame, Keanu never seemed to fully embrace the celebrity lifestyle. He didn't chase attention, he avoided the parties and the spotlight. For him, the work itself mattered more than the image. But the world was about to see an entirely new side of Keanu Reeves, because his next role wouldn't just make him famous, it would make him a symbol for an entire generation. By the late 1990s, Keanu Reeves was already a proven star, but nothing could have prepared him or the world for what came next. In 1999, he stepped into a role that would forever change both his career and the landscape of cinema. Neo. The Matrix wasn't just another sci-fi film, it was a revolution. Bullet time, slow-motion action sequences, and a story that questioned the very fabric of reality. Audiences had never seen anything like it. At the center of it all was Keanu, the reluctant hero who looked like an everyman but carried the weight of a savior. The movie became a global phenomenon, grossing hundreds of millions and embedding itself into pop culture forever. For Keanu, Neo was more than a character. It was a reflection of his own quiet search for meaning. He wasn't the typical cocky action star. His stillness, his vulnerability, and his quiet intensity gave the role a depth that resonated with audiences worldwide. Suddenly, Keanu wasn't just a movie star, he was an icon. The success of the Matrix trilogy cemented him as one of Hollywood's most bankable names. Studios lined up with offers. Fans celebrated him as a new kind of action hero. But while the world saw triumph, Keanu carried something else behind the scenes. Because at the very height of his fame, he was walking into the darkest years of his personal life. Even so, The Matrix showcased not just his star power, but his generosity. Keanu famously gave away a massive portion of his earnings to the crew and special effects team, believing they were the true heroes of the film. In an industry obsessed with ego, this humility made him stand apart. At this point, Keanu had everything most actors dream of: fame, fortune, and a franchise that defined an era. But his story was about to shift. Behind the cameras, heartbreak was waiting. Because just as Neo was learning the truth about the Matrix, Keanu was about to face the harshest realities of his own life. Long before the Matrix changed everything, Keanu had already endured one of the greatest losses of his life. In the early 1990s, his closest friend wasn't a Hollywood mogul or an A-list co-star, it was River Phoenix. The two met on the set of I Love You to Death and grew inseparable. They bonded over music, motorcycles, and a shared discomfort with fame. For Keanu, River wasn't just a friend, he was family. In 1991, they starred together in My Own Private Idaho, a film that would become a cult classic. Off-screen, their bond was even stronger. They were young men navigating Hollywood together, often seen side by side, laughing, playing music, dreaming about the future. Keanu once said River was one of the most talented actors of his generation, and those who knew them agreed. Their friendship was pure and rare. But on Halloween night in 1993, tragedy struck. River collapsed outside the Viper Room in Los Angeles after an overdose. He was only 23 years old. The news stunned the world, but for Keanu, it was personal devastation. Losing River was like losing a brother. Unlike many in Hollywood, Keanu didn't grieve publicly. He gave no emotional press conferences, no interviews filled with tears. Instead, he retreated into silence. Those close to him noticed the change. His already quiet demeanor became even more withdrawn. Grief had carved itself into him, shaping not just his personal life, but the way he approached his work. When you watch Keanu on screen, especially in roles heavy with loss, you can almost feel River's shadow lingering in his performances. The stillness, the unspoken pain, the depth in his eyes, it all seemed connected to that moment of loss. The world moved on, but Keanu carried River's memory with him. He once said simply, "He was a remarkable human being and actor. We miss him." That understated grief said everything. But as devastating as River's passing was, it was only the beginning of the heartbreaks that would define Keanu's life. Because just a few years later, tragedy would strike again, this time even closer to home. If losing River Phoenix carved a scar in Keanu Reeves's life, the next tragedy nearly broke him completely. In the late 1990s, Keanu found happiness with actress and assistant Jennifer Same. Their relationship wasn't flashy or tabloid-driven. It was quiet, grounded, two people who simply enjoyed being together. For a man who had endured so much instability, Jennifer represented something rare, peace. In 1999, the couple were expecting their first child, a daughter. Keanu was filled with hope, ready to embrace fatherhood. But joy turned to heartbreak on Christmas Eve of that year, when their baby girl was stillborn at 8 months. The devastation was unimaginable. Keanu later admitted that the loss left him broken, unable to fully recover. Jennifer, too, was overwhelmed with grief. Their relationship, once steady, couldn't withstand the weight of that tragedy. Though they parted ways, they remained close, bound by the sorrow they shared. But the cruelty of fate was not finished. Just 4 months later, in April 2001, Jennifer was driving home from a party in Los Angeles when she lost control of her car. The crash killed her instantly. She was only 28 years old. For Keanu, the loss was shattering. In the span of less than 2 years, he had lost both a child and the woman he loved. At Jennifer's funeral, he served as a pallbearer, carrying her coffin with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout his life. But inside, he was devastated. Unlike other stars who turned to the media to share their grief, Keanu did the opposite. He withdrew, choosing silence and solitude. His friends noticed he grew more private, more introspective. He threw himself into work, into music, into riding his motorcycle through long stretches of empty roads. It wasn't about distraction, it was survival. Years later, when asked about love and loss, Keanu didn't romanticize it. He said simply, "Grief changes shape, but it never ends." Those words revealed a truth he lived every day. He hadn't moved on. He had learned to carry it, but life wasn't finished testing him. Even as his heart carried unthinkable pain, his body began to show the toll of years in action films. Keanu Reeves's life has never been free from pain, and while tragedy had already marked his heart, his body was forced to endure its own punishment. Years of intense action roles left behind more than just box office hits. They left scars. While filming in the 1990s, Keanu suffered a serious neck injury that required spinal surgery. He quietly endured months of recovery, learning to walk again while still pushing forward with his career. Later came cracked ribs, broken teeth, and countless bruises from doing his own stunts. Even his famous motorcycle rides, which he used as an escape from grief, often left him battered. Most recently, at 61, while shooting a comedy, not an action epic, Keanu slipped during a cold plunge scene. His kneecap shattered, as he described it, like a potato chip. The injury was gruesome, a brutal reminder that even the strongest bodies eventually give way. Doctors warned him about long-term damage, and fans began to wonder if this was the end of his action days. But for Keanu, pain was nothing new. Physical wounds were just another battle alongside the emotional ones he had carried for decades. What set him apart wasn't that he avoided pain, it was that he accepted it. He never dramatized his injuries, never boasted about pushing through. He simply kept going, quietly and relentlessly. That same quiet strength guided his life away from the cameras. While other stars thrived in the chaos of Hollywood, Keanu often retreated. He lived modestly, avoided the Hollywood party scene, and rode through the city on his motorcycle, helmet hiding his face. Fame never seemed to tempt him, because he had seen too much loss to be fooled by glamour. For Keanu, retreat wasn't defeat, it was preservation. It allowed him to keep creating, keep giving, without being consumed by the spotlight. And it was in that retreat, in that careful distance from the noise of fame, that the world began to see something rare. Because while Hollywood expected tragedy to break him, Keanu used it to become something else entirely, a man defined not by loss but by kindness. For most people, the kind of loss Keanu Reeves endured would have left scars too deep to hide. But what makes his story remarkable isn't just the tragedies, it's how he chose to live after them. In an industry driven by ego and excess, Keanu became known for something far rarer: humility. Stories of his kindness have become legendary. He quietly donated millions from the Matrix sequels to the crew and visual effects team, insisting they deserved the reward more than he did. He's known for giving generous bonuses to stunt teams, buying them motorcycles as thank you gifts for their work. When asked about wealth, he once said, "Money doesn't mean anything to me. I could live on what I've already made for the next few centuries." But perhaps his most powerful acts were the quiet ones. Secret donations to children's hospitals. Years spent supporting cancer research, inspired by his sister's battle with leukemia. Riding the subway like an ordinary commuter. Offering his seat to a stranger without fanfare. For fans, these small gestures revealed the truth. Keanu wasn't playing a role. He was simply himself. Even his career choices reflect that humility. He turned down roles that didn't feel right, walked away from sequels he didn't believe in, and often took pay cuts so other actors could join a project. Unlike so many of his peers, Keanu never seemed driven by fame or fortune. He was driven by connection, by stories that mattered, and by the people around him. And maybe that's why audiences love him so fiercely. Because when you look at Keanu Reeves, you don't just see a movie star. You see a man who turned grief into empathy, who carried loss without bitterness, who showed the world that resilience doesn't always have to be loud. Sometimes it can be gentle. At 60, Keanu's legacy is more than his films. It's the example he set, the idea that pain doesn't have to destroy you, that kindness is stronger than tragedy, and that grace can endure even in the harshest light of fame. Keanu Reeves's life reads like a script no writer would dare invent. A boy abandoned by his father, a teenager who lost his dream of hockey, a young man who lost his best friend, a partner robbed from him, and a child he never got to raise. Heartbreak after heartbreak, each one heavy enough to end a career, or even a life. And yet here he is at 60, still acting, still giving, still riding through the streets on his motorcycle with quiet determination. He never denied his grief, he carried it. And in doing so, he showed the world that tragedy doesn't have to define who you are. The story of Keanu Reeves is beyond heartbreaking, but it is also deeply inspiring. Because in the end, his legacy isn't the pain he endured, it's the compassion he gave back to the world. If you found Keanu's story as moving as I did, make sure to stick around. There's so much more ahead. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe.